I think as living entities, all of us possess these opulences, perhaps one or all of these opulences to a limited degree. But Krishna, who's currently speaking the Bhagavad Gita right now to Arjuna on the battlefield, he's described as Bhagavan. So you'll often find the term Shri Bhagavan Uvacha used quite a lot in the Gita because it's denoting that Krishna is Bhagavan, or he's the possessor of these opulences in their completeness, in their entirety. So that's a definition of the word Bhagavan. And what's significant is that Krishna does not have to work hard to maintain or develop these opulences. By nature, he possesses them in full. And the name Krishna actually means the one who is all attractive. And it's also stated in the Gita in 10.41, Yad yad vibhuti mat sattvam srimad orjitam evava tat tat eva vagachatvam mama tejo amsha sambhavam. So whatever opulent, beautiful, or glorious creations that we see in this world spring from just a spark of Krishna's splendor. So anything in this world that sort of captivates us, that makes us feel drawn towards, that we find something which is beautiful, ultimately it's not even a spark of Krishna's beauty. Nonetheless, I think to illustrate how Krishna is the possessor of all these opulences, just to give a few examples that are described in Shastra, especially the Bhagavad Gita. So in terms of wealth, it's stated in 5.29, Bhoktaram Yagnatapasam Sarva Loka Maheshwaram. So Sarva Loka Maheshwaram means that Krishna is the proprietor of not just the human beings, but of all the demigods and of all the planets, and therefore there can be ultimately no one richer than him. In terms of strength, it's stated in 7.11, Balam Balavatam Chaham, he's the strength of the strong. In terms of beauty, the Brahma Samhita describes this very nicely, and this is part of one of the prayers that we sing every morning at 7 a.m., the Govindam prayers. So, Gandharpa Koti Kamaniya Visheshubham. So, what this means is that Krishna's unique loveliness or beauty charms millions of cupids. Now, you may wonder, why is it limited to millions of cupids? Why not billions of cupids? But this is just a metaphor and an example. But ultimately, Krishna's beauty can't be compared to anything of this material creation. And in terms of fame, well, Krishna is literally known to everyone, every household in the Indian subcontinent. But I think as the Bhagavad Gita is spreading all over the world, then his fame is also spreading. But I think it's important to appreciate that this planet is just a mere speck in the entire universal cosmos, and we can't really appreciate the extent to which Krishna's fame spreads. And in terms of renunciation, no one can be more renounced than Krishna. So although he possesses all the above 5 opulences as I described, he's able to very easily just let go of them. So there's a nice pastime in Krishna book about how Jarasandha tried to defeat or attack Mathura 17 times, and each time he was easily defeated by Krishna. I mean, it was just a play of his arms, not real much effort was required for Krishna. But still, Jarasandha was so stubborn and so obstinate that he thought he would attack Mathura for the 18th time. And then Krishna thought, enough is enough, I have to give my army a bit of a break, and let's not entertain Jarasandha anymore. So what Krishna does is that makes him famous as Ranchor, is that he leaves the battlefield without any weapons, and then Jarasandha comes after him, but of course Jarasandha can never sort of reach Krishna. And even though back in the day, for Kshatriya kings to renounce the battlefield, it would be considered a great act of cowardice, Krishna is actually glorified as Ranchor. So I think Ranchor is a Gujarati or Hindi meaning. Ran means battlefield, and Chor means to leave. So if you go to Gujarat, especially, like, there's thousands upon thousands of temples where Krishna is glorified as Ranchor. So we actually glorify him because he sort of supposedly performed a cowardly act of leaving the battlefield. So, this just goes to show his extent of renunciation. So my point is that whilst Krishna naturally possesses all these opulences in full, in contrast, we have to work so hard to try and develop these opulences, or to even maintain them, even to a small degree. So for example, if we want to become quite strong, then we have to go to the gym quite a lot. If we want to become beautiful, then it's stated that last year people spent globally over $100 billion on cosmetics alone worldwide. So there's a lot of things, if we want to become quite beautiful, then we have to spend quite a lot. if we want to become knowledgeable, then it requires so much study at university, so many years of sacrifice. And then if we want to earn lots of wealth, I mean, that's probably the most difficult one, I would say. It requires a lot of risk-taking, a lot of endeavor, and very, very hard labor. So all in all, because we are in need of something, and we have desires to gain something, we have many duties to perform. Krishna, on the other hand, because he's complete in himself, he's complete in all the opulences, then he has no duty to perform. Nonetheless, what he does, as described in this verse, is out of his causeless compassion, he comes to this world in order to re-establish the principles of dharma or duty and how to perform these duties in the right way. And this is the crux of the Gita, because the main question of the Gita is in 2.7, where Arjuna specifically asks about his duty to Krishna. Pritchami tvam dharma samudachetaha. Oh Krishna, what is my specific duty in this situation? So we have to remember that Arjuna was in the middle of a battlefield, and Krishna was his charioteer, and then Arjuna was about to combat the Kauravas on the opposing side, headed by Duryodhana. Although Duryodhana was quite evil, they were still his relatives. So Arjuna was in a bit of a dilemma, and he asked, what is my specific duty in this situation to Krishna? And then Krishna talks in answer to Arjuna's question about two types of duties. So the first thing he talks about is svadharma, so one's occupational duty, or how one works or engages with the world. That's called svadharma. And the other type of duty is sanatana dharma, which is our eternal constitutional position. And it's described in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, Jivara Swarupa Hoya Krishna Nityadas. So we are eternally servants of Krishna, and our duty is to serve him. And to describe the principle of dharma a bit more, dharma essentially also can be described as the inherent constitution of something. So, for example, the inherent constitution or the dharma, just to give a simple example, of sugar is sweetness. The dharma of salt, you could say, is saltiness. And therefore, the intrinsic nature or the dharma of the soul is to serve the Supreme Krishna. And this is also described in the Bhagavad Gita of how we serve Krishna. The way we do that is through bhakti yoga. And bhakti yoga means engaging in the ninefold processes of devotional service, beginning with shravanam. Shravanam means hearing, and this is potentially the most important one. And this is how we start engaging in devotional service. And then Krishna explains in the Gita in 934, Manmana bhavamad bhakto madhyaji mam namaskuru mameveshasi yuktvevam atmanam matparayanaha. Engage your mind always in thinking of me, become my devotee, offer obeisances to me, and worship me. Being completely absorbed in me, surely you will come to me. So the way to come to Krishna is always to think about Krishna, become his devotee, worship him, and become ultimately absorbed in him. And this is basically Bhakti Yoga summarized. At the same time, you may argue, we also have material bodies. You know, we've got things to do. We've got our unique psychophysical natures that can't be ignored. We've got our needs for food, for shelter, for relationships, and we also want to make a bit of a contribution to this world. Krishna, however, very kindly accommodates this, and that's why he provides us with the Institute of Varnashrama, and this stated in 4.13. Chaturvarnya maya shrishtam gurna karma vibhagasha. So according to the three modes of material nature and the work associated with them, the four divisions of human society are created by me. So the Varnashrama is these four divisions of human society, and what they do is that they cater for our svadharma, and the svadharma, as I explained, are duties in relation to the material body. And once we, and because our svadharma is catered for, this enables us to ultimately engage in our sanatana dharma, which is our duty in relation to the soul, and that, as I explained, is bhakti yoga. So, question: what are the four divisions of human society as per Varnashrama? Has anyone heard of it? Yes, please. Yeah. Yeah, excellent. Yeah. Who's going to help him out with the fourth one? Kshatriya, yes. Yeah, definitely, yeah. So, yeah, Brahmana, Kshatriya, Vaishya, Shudra, yeah, excellent, yeah. So these are the four Varnas. So Varnas means class of society. And then you also have the four ashramas. What are the four ashrams in Varnashrama? So these are this you described are the occupations, but then you also have stages of life, quite similar to the stages we go through in today. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Yeah, excellent, yeah. Yes, yeah. Sannyas, yeah, perfect, yeah. So brahmachari means student life, grahastha means married life, vanaprastha means retired life, and sannyas means renounced life. Yeah. And then coming back to the varnas, as you mentioned, brahmanas are your intellectual class of people. So they're your priests, your teachers. Kshatriyas are your administrative class of people. So they're the rulers, the administrators, the managers, the politicians. Vaishyas are the mercantile class of people. So these are the tradespeople, the farmers, the businessmen. And the Shudras are the laborer class. They are often sort of involved in arts and crafts and general labor and assistance to the other varnas. So each of us, whether we're a man or a woman, we all have an inclination towards a certain type of work. So some of us are predominantly intellectual by nature, where we love to teach, we love to learn, we love to study. Some of us may be more inclined towards leadership and management type roles. Some of us are more entrepreneurial and I guess liking making money, and others may be sort of more hands-on and skilled at arts and crafts. So we all have our individual varnas, and the way to recognize your varna, my mentor once explained in a class, is to identify what your values are. So for a brahmana is generally motivated by two things, and that is truth and compassion. A Kshatriya is motivated by justice and power. A Vaishya is motivated by growth and expansion. And a Shudra is motivated by security and self-expression. So it depends on what your values are, what you value in life, and that sort of helps you identify what your varna is. And you may argue that sometimes I feel that I just want to read, study, and at other times, like I just want to do something hands-on, practical. And I think it's important to recognize that your varna is determined by your predominant nature. So one that you feel that you can identify most of the time. So coming back to the context of the Gita, for Arjuna, he was a natural Kshatriya, and his duty was to fight in the war and protect the citizens ultimately from the rule of wicked Duryodhana. And Arjuna, however, the problem was that Arjuna was a bit reluctant, and he frankly said that he would rather live like a mendicant and go to the forest to meditate rather than fight in the war. So superficially, it could be said that Arjuna is choosing the more quote-unquote spiritual option because he's renouncing his worldly obligations and he just wants to go to the forest to meditate. And furthermore, he's also trying to avoid violence. But there are three key flaws to this argument. The first key flaw is that Krishna had already said earlier in 3.6, and this is Krishna's words, one who restrains the actions of the senses but whose mind dwells on sense objects certainly deludes himself and is called a pretender. So pretender is quite a heavy word. And the reason why Krishna uses that is because often we find people like they may want to renounce their worldly obligations but do it out of a sense of frustration, but not out of a sense of maturity or detachment. And so even if a person goes to the forest to meditate, and then because the mind would constantly be thinking of problems back home or be thinking of the objects of the senses, such as eating or other various types of enjoyment, then that person really wouldn't be able to reap the results of his so-called austerity. The second reason why Arjuna's argument is flawed about renouncing his worldly obligations and simply going to the forest is because Arjuna explicitly stated in the 6th chapter of the Gita, the chapter which Krishna elaborately describes the process of Ashtanga Yoga and Dhyana Yoga, or the process which involves meditating for thousands upon thousands of years in the forest and then trying to realize the self through that way, being in seclusion. Is because Arjuna frankly states that the mind is restless and unsteady. I don't know if you've ever noticed that, but for me all the time, And it's said that Chanchala himana Krishna pramadi balavadridam tasyaham nigraham manya vairi vasudhuskram. So the mind is more difficult to control than the wind itself. And if Arjuna, who was Krishna's most intimate companion, expresses his hesitancy in practicing this type of yoga 5,000 years ago, then who are we to try and renounce all our worldly obligations and just go to the forest to perform that. So I think it's safe to say that for us, it's important to follow the Varnashrama Dharma in the right way. And what is the right way, I'll come on to in a moment. And the third argument is that why Arjuna shouldn't abandon his duty is, well, Arjuna states that he was afraid about committing violence against his family members. But Krishna explicitly tells him that what would be truly violent would be not to fight. This is because real violence is against the soul when the soul is denied opportunity for self-realization. And Srila Prabhupada nicely explains that one who does not use this human form of life for realizing the self is called a kripana, or a miser, whereas a brahmana is one who is intelligent enough to recognize that this human form of life is fleeting, and uses this fleeting human form of life to attain a destination which is permanent. So if Arjuna was not to fight on the pretext of trying to realize the self, Krishna has already explained that self-realization would not be possible for him that way. Even if it was possible for Arjuna to realize the self by going to the forest to meditate, as a leader, he would be, because people would be following his path, he would be misleading the people in general, because it's certainly not common for people to renounce their worldly obligations and just go to the forest. And if people abandon their duties, that would lead to irresponsibility. And when there's irresponsibility, moral codes are abandoned. When moral codes are abandoned, there's havoc in society. And when there's havoc in society, there's exploitation of various classes of people, and there's exploitation of women, as described in the Bhagavad Gita. And what that results in is something called Varna Shankara, or unwanted population. And that's sort of described in the subsequent verse in the Gita to what we're reading from today. So therefore, when people go astray from Varnashrama, as we see in today's society, hardly anyone is interested in self-realization. So what Krishna is proposing, however, in the third chapter is something called Karma Yoga, and that's the crux of this chapter. And this is self-realization through action. Srila Prabhupada explains that actually Karma Yoga is very natural to perform. It does not matter who one is, so whether one is a street sweeper or a high-flying business person, or whether one is a student or parent, one should try and perform one's occupational duties for the pleasure of Bhagavan, and that's stated in 3.9. Yajnarthat karmano nyatra lokoyam karma bandhanaha tad artham karma kaunteya mukta sangha samacharaha. Work done as a sacrifice for Vishnu has to be performed, otherwise work causes bondage in this material world. Therefore, O son of Kunti, perform your prescribed duties for his satisfaction, and in that way, you will always remain free from bondage. So you may ask, how is it possible for me to practically perform karma yoga? Like you might be a business person, an accountant, whatever occupation you work in. So how is it possible, for me to actually do it for the service of God? And Srila Prabhupada explains that it's quite simple. All you need to do beforehand is to establish some form of a connection with God beforehand. So we all have homes, right? So it's really nice to have deities at home, so that when we wake up in the morning, we can try and remember the deities, we can try and worship the deities. We can try and engage in some spiritual sadhana, and we can try and offer food to the deities. So what this does is that when we ultimately go out during the day to earn a living, we do it in the mindset that we're not just earning a living just to maintain ourselves. We're doing it to maintain Krishna's household, because ultimately, if we try and put Krishna in the center of our household, and if you try and recognize that ultimately everything belongs to him, our household, including ourselves, our properties, our job, then you're spiritualizing your day-to-day work. And so that's sort of a practical way of how to perform karma yoga. And what's really nice about karma yoga is that it makes you perform your work in the best possible way. And just to give a simple example of that, so say if you were to engage in cleaning your house, and cleaning your house, at least for me, is such a chore. It's quite difficult. So if you're just doing it for yourself, then you'd be very reluctant to do it properly. However, if you recognize that someone important, like the Prime Minister of the country, was coming around to visit, then naturally you'd be engaged in that task to your best possible ability. So you'd give it your all in all. And so similarly, when we're performing karma yoga, when we're performing our occupational duties, that inspires us to give it our very best. So indeed, it's stated that one of the 26 qualities of a pure devotee is that a pure devotee is expert. So that doesn't necessarily mean that expertise is that you're world-class or you're the best at everything. It just means that you're sincerely trying your hardest in whatever endeavors you're undertaking. So say if we're a student, then we can strive to ace our exams and top them. If we're a whatever occupation we're in, so if we're a doctor, accountant, lawyer, whatnot, we can strive to give it our very heart and soul to the work we're doing. And that is ultimately karma yoga, because ultimately we're doing it for a higher purpose in order to please Krishna. And I think this enthusiasm in your I talked about enthusiasm in your work, but one point I often need to remind myself is that same enthusiasm can also be extended to our sadhana. So when we're hearing, when we're reading, when we're chanting, at least for me, it's so easy to go on automatic mode when you're chanting. You're not really appreciating the reason why you're doing your spiritual sadhana. So what I need to try and remind myself is that I also need to perform my sadhana to the best of my ability. Because ultimately I'm chanting, but who am I chanting for? I'm trying to chant to please Krishna. And what's really important about karma yoga is to not be attached to the results of your work. So Krishna says in 2.48, to perform your duty in spite of success or failure. So sometimes in our worldly obligations, we might be successful, we might get that promotion we wanted, we might get that bonus, and sometimes not, sometimes just the opposite, we may have unsavory interactions towards work colleagues, or and I guess that can apply in all aspects of our life as well, whether we're a family person as well. And I think even in our services, sometimes we're quite successful in our preaching, sometimes not so. Even in our sadhana, dare I say. So I think it's important that, not be attached to the results of our work, but just to keep striving to perform our best. And Srila Prabhupada gives a really nice example of to illustrate this in a class I was listening to recently. And the example that he gave was, say if you're an employee of a large multinational organization, in 1 month you bring in $100,000 worth of revenue of sales, and in the second month you bring in, say, $100 worth of sales. So as an employee of that organization, you're not entitled to even 1 cent of the revenue that you generated, be it $100,000 or be it $100. Nonetheless, at the end of every month, you'll still be getting your regular paycheck. And so similarly in our relationship with Krishna, sometimes we're successful in our services, in our occupational duties, and sometimes we're not so successful, but our relationship will still keep continuing. His love for us will still continue regardless. Jai Shri Radha Govinda Bhagavan Ki Jai. So that's why it's important to keep striving, keep persevering, regardless of the outcome, and that's essentially the crux of karma yoga. And what's really interesting is that in the text, in the purport, it's also described from the Srimad Bhagavatam. It is understood that Lord Krishna was performing all the religious duties at home and out of home as required as a householder. So even Lord Krishna performs duties, although as we discussed as we discussed before, that he clearly has no duty to perform because he's complete in himself in terms of possessing everything, and especially all 6 opulences. And as explained, the reason why he performs his duties is to set an example for us, because ultimately there's no greater example than he. So just to relate some of Krishna's pastimes from the Bhagavatam, when he was in Dwarka living as a prince, a king, then does anyone know how many queens he had in Dwarka? Any idea of how many queens he might have had in Dwarka? Yes, 16,108. Yeah, that's correct. Yeah. What's really interesting and what makes him the Supreme Personality of Godhead was that he was able to expand himself individually to reciprocate individually with each of those queens. So he had individual palaces for those queens. And he had very individual interactions with them because he also was able to expand himself into 16,108 forms. And then, as I explained, although Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, what he does is that he still wakes up very early just to set a good example. Something I need to try and be more work towards as well. So Krishna would wake up at the Brahma Muhurta period. So this is the period that's 1 hour before dawn. And then what he would do is wake up early, take a bath, and then put on fresh clothing, and then meditate. Who do you think Krishna meditated upon? Any thoughts? Who would Krishna meditate upon? Yeah, absolutely, himself, because there's no one greater than himself. So again, he's trying to set an example for us to meditate. But I mean, if we were to meditate upon ourselves, it would seem quite vain, because. but I think that the example he's trying to set is that we should try and meditate upon Krishna, and the way to do that is by chanting Hare Krishna, by chanting the Maha Mantra, and then after performing his meditation. He would perform other various rituals and daily worship that were commonplace during his time in the Dwapara Yuga. So then he would offer respects to the sun god, he would offer respects to Narayana. And then what he would do is he would give lots and lots away in charity. So in particular, it's described that he would give many groups of cows away in charity. Each group of cow consisted of 13,084 cows. And then each cow was a young cow with its firstborn calf and its udders full of milk. And each cow was decorated very nicely, so with pearl necklaces, with silken clothes, with gold-tipped horns, with silver-plated hooves. And these kind of cows Krishna would give away in charity to such large numbers. What I really find inspiring about the Vedic literature is how specific they are in detail. So 13,084 cows, I sometimes wonder why not 13,085 or why not 13,083. But if anyone knows the answer, then let me know. So anyways, after giving away in charity, Krishna would receive the Brahmins, hear from them, hear katha, and then again he would perform further rituals. And he would then receive various guests, and after honoring and receiving the various guests, finally he would sort of take something to eat, have breakfast, and then what he would do was bid his family members goodbye, and then obviously depart for his to the Siddharma Assembly Hall, and this is where he would engage in his duty as the head of state. So at the Siddharma Assembly Hall, there would initially be various entertainment performances, various music, and then what would happen is that they would discuss matters of state, such as the economic or political affairs of that time, whether there were any threatening, any threats, and whether the citizens, most importantly, whether the citizens were happy or not. So Krishna, through these pastimes, essentially showed us how to live like an ideal Kshatriya and ultimately as an ideal householder, so that we can try and also follow his example, such as waking up early, meditating, and giving in charity, things like that. What's really important to remember is that Krishna's example should be followed, but it shouldn't be imitated. And so, for example, Krishna also performed various other incredible pastimes. So, like, he obviously had the rasa dance, where he engaged in with the rasa dance performance with the gopis of Vrindavan. And so it's really important to appreciate that, Krishna performs amazing pastimes like this. He lifted Govardhan Hill with his pinky finger. But obviously these are pastimes we can't imitate because only God can engage in such pastimes. And just coming back to the rasa dance pastimes he had with the gopis, so I mean, it can never sort of be compared to the interactions between a man and a woman of this world, of course. Like the loving interaction between Krishna and the gopis of Vrindavan is compared to pure gold. And that's there's a pure loving reciprocation there because the gopis simply want to try and please Krishna, whereas the interaction in this world between a man and a woman is often compared to iron, and because it epitomizes lust or the desire to please one's own senses. And of course, when Krishna performed the rasa dance, he was only 8 years old, so there can never be any trace of lust anyway at that age. And it's also stated that Krishna is the Paramatma, or the super soul within everyone's heart, and therefore he's the true proprietor or husband of not only the gopis, but of everyone. And all living entities were all part of his energy. So for Krishna to dance with the gopis, or anyone for that matter, it's basically like a child playing with his own reflection only. And there's nothing sort of untoward there. And it's also really nicely stated in the Bhagavatam. One of my favorite verses is Vikritam Vrajavadupiridam Shavishnu Shraddhan Vito Nushrunayad Atavarna Yedya Bhaktim Param Bhagavati Pratilabhya Kamam Ridrogam Ashra Apahinoti Achiranadhira. So this is described in 10:33-39, that anyone who faithfully hears or describes the Lord's playful affairs with the young gopis of Vrindavan will attain the Lord's pure devotional service. Thus, he will quickly become sober and conquer lust, which is a disease of the heart. So whenever, so actually by hearing about Krishna's pastimes, it removes the lust within our heart, the desire for selfish enjoyment, and it reawakens our natural propensity for loving devotional service. In contrast, if we're reading something like reading or watching a romantic sort of movie of this world, then it agitates us. And then it arouses lust. So this is like completely worlds, gulfs apart. And then the question may arise that if Krishna's pastimes are misunderstood, such as his pastimes of stealing butter or dancing with the gopis, then why does he perform them in the first place? And so there's two reasons for that. The first and the most important reason is that Krishna engages in such pastimes simply to please his devotees. So when Krishna lifts Govardhan Hill, kills the demons, steals butters, or dances with the gopis, he does that because he reciprocates in loving relationship with his devotees. And even today, you'll find that devotees take great relish in remembering and being absorbed in such pastimes. So there's that verse in the Gita, Matchitta Matgata Prana, Bodhayanta Parasparam, Kathayanta Shimam Nityam, Dushyanti Charamatita. The thoughts of my pure devotees always dwell in me. Their lives are fully devoted to my service, and they derive great satisfaction and they derive great bliss from conversing to one another about me and enlightening one another. So devotees even today take great pleasure in relishing such pastimes. And in order to please his devotees, Krishna is so absorbed in wanting to please his devotees that even puts his own name at risk. So, for example, during the battle, this is really nicely, vividly illustrated during the battlefield of Kurukshetra. So, when Arjuna was fighting, and then Krishna was acting as a charioteer, Bhishma Dev was on the opposing side, and on the side of the Kauravas, and Bhishma Dev was fighting with great vehemence. He was sort of shooting arrows at Arjuna relentlessly, and it was felt that at one point Arjuna was going to be defeated by Bhishma Dev. And so in order for Krishna to protect Arjuna, what he does is that he even breaks, or tries to break, one of his vows that he took prior to the Battle of Kurukshetra. Can anyone who might have read the Mahabharata recall what that vow might be? Krishna's vow he took before the battle of... Yeah, excellent. Thank you, Prabhu. So Krishna made the vow that he won't lift any weapon. And so what Krishna actually does is that he lifts a chariot wheel and charges towards Bhishma Dev in order to protect his devotee Arjuna. And so you could say that perhaps a chariot wheel is not really a weapon, so maybe Krishna does indeed maintain his vow. But I think the point to emphasize is that Krishna is even ready to abandon his good name in order to try and please and protect his devotee. And there's such a sweet reciprocation between the Lord and the devotee. So whilst Krishna with the chariot wheel is charging towards Bhishma Dev, Arjuna is running after Krishna, grabbing onto his leg, and really imploring Krishna to stop, don't. Arjuna is really intent on protecting Krishna's good name, in glorifying Krishna, whereas Krishna is really intent in protecting his devotee. So there's a really nice, sweet, transcendental relationship, a competition almost, between the Lord and his devotee. And therefore, Krishna states that more important than pleasing the so-called moralists of this world, obviously, even though he did nothing immoral, it's more important for him to please his devotees, and even if it means bringing disrepute for himself. The second reason why Krishna performs such pastimes is to reestablish his supremacy, and that he is the supreme personality of Godhead. So sometimes people take it for granted that Krishna is just an ordinary person like you and me because he performs these, worldly pastimes. So sometimes Krishna occasionally sends these reminders, like shows the universal form within his mouth or expands as a universal form, in order for us to, in order to reiterate that, hello, I'm still the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Don't forget. so that's his intention. And I think what's really important to remember is that when Krishna performs activities that apparently contradict dharma, then we should follow his words in Shastra and not his actions. Because ultimately, Lord Krishna performs his prescribed duties just to set an ideal example for us and help us also not lose sight of the ultimate spiritual goal, which is to attain him. So I'll just summarize today's talk. At the start, we discussed how Krishna is Bhagavan because he's the possessor of 6 opulences in their fullness, in their entirety, in their completeness, and therefore he has no duty to perform. We, on the other hand, are in need of something, and therefore we have many duties to perform. The best way to perform our duties is through Varnashrama, and this allows us to engage our psychophysical natures in the service of God, and we should do so in the best way possible. Sometimes we succeed in our duties, sometimes we fail. Sometimes we succeed in our services, sometimes we fail. The main thing is not to be discouraged and keep going. And sometimes we might have taste in our sadhana, sometimes we don't have taste in our spiritual practices. But again, keep striving, keep practicing, and someday by Krishna's grace, things will be better than what we'd ever imagine. And there's a really nice hope-giving verse from the Bhagavatam I'd just like to conclude with. I think it's quite a famous verse. So it's a prayer by Lord Brahma to Lord Krishna. Tatenukampam susamikshramano bunjana evatma kritam vipakam ridvagva purbhir vidadam namaste jiveto yo mukti pade sadaya bhak. My dear Lord, one who earnestly waits for you to bestow your causeless mercy upon him, all the while patiently suffering the reactions of his past misdeeds and offering you respectful obeisances with his heart, words, and body, is surely eligible for liberation, for it has become his rightful claim. Thank you very much. Hare Krishna. So I just want to caveat that this talk was really just for my own learning. They say that when you teach something, the more likely you are to remember something. So if you liked any points, then I just sort of took away from, it was just basically borrowed from the classes I've been listening to. If you didn't like something, then I take full responsibility. So if you do have any corrections, any questions or reflections, then I'd be very happy and open to receive them. Thank you, Hare Krishna. Any questions? Okay. Yeah, so the verse I spoke in was in Sanskrit, and Sanskrit is like said to be the mother of all languages, and all languages ultimately have their origin in Sanskrit. Worldwide, every language you see, and Sanskrit is also said to be the language of the demigods. They also speak in Sanskrit, and ultimately all our shastras are written in Sanskrit. And Sanskrit is so perfect that it conveys the meaning without too much sort of waffling. So the verses we're reading in the Bhagavad Gita, they're a specific meter. So each line in the Bhagavad Gita will have a specific number of syllables. And it's incredible like how such profound philosophical depth, such philosophical knowledge can be conveyed through a language which is so concise. And because Sanskrit is so concise, it's considered to be the mother of all languages. Is that all right? Any other questions? Okay. If not, thank you very much for tolerating me, for paying attention. And in 10 minutes' time, we'll have Gaura Arati. Thank you. Hare Krishna.
Jaya Gauranitai, 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 Jaya Gauranitai. Jaya Gauranitai, 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 Jaya Gauranitai. Shri Shri Radha Gokulanand ki, Shri Shri Sita Ram Lakshman Hanuman ki, Shri Shri Gauranitai ki. Jaya Jaya Gaurachande Arati ka shobha. Arati ka shobha. Janavita Tavane Jagamanaloba. Radna Shiva Shani Arati Kare na Brahma Adi Deva Gane. Madhura Vedanga Vaje Paramarasala Shankha Bhaje Ganga Bhaje Madhur 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 Bhaje Shankha Bhaje Ganga Bhaje Madhur 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 Bhaje Madhur 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 Bhaje Madhur 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 Bhaje Nitai Gaura Hari Bol Hari Bol Hari Bol Nitai Gaura Hari Bol Nitai Gaura Hari Bol Hari Bol Hari Bol Nitai Gaura Hari Bol Jaya Gaura Nitai Gaura Nitai Gaura Nitai Jaya Gaura Nitai Bahu Koti Chandrajini Vadana Ujjvala Gala Desi Banamala Kore Chalamala Siva Shukanarada Preme Garagara Bhakti Vinoda Dekhe Gora Rasampara Jaya Jaya Gaura Chandi Arati Ka Shobha Janavi Tatavane Jagamanalobha Gaurangi Jai Shri Krishna Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Jaya Radha Gokulanand, Radha Gokulanand, Radha Gokulanand, Shri Radhe. Jaya Sita Ram Lakshman Hanuman, Jaya Sita Ram Lakshman Hanuman. Jaya Gaurani Jai, Gaurani Jai, Gaurani Jai, Jaya Gaurani Jai. Jaya Jaya Prabhupada, 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 Jaya Jaya Prabhupada. Nitai Gaura Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Nitai Gaura Hari Bol. Nitai Gaura Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Nitai Gaura Hari Bol. Shri Shri Radha Gokulanand ki, Shri Shri Sita Ram Lakshman Hanuman ki, Shri Shri Gaurani Jai ki, Nitai Gaur Pramanande, Hari Hari Bol.
Well, everyone will sing Narasimha Arti now. If everybody can be seated. Thank you. Namaste Narasimhaya. Prahlad Lad Laine. Hiranyakashipu Vakshaha. Silatankana Khalaye. Ito Nasimo Parato Nasimo. yato yato yamitato nasimo mahe nasimo hridaye nasimo Narasimhamadhim sharanam prapade Narasimhamadhim sharanam prapade Avakara kamalavare nakam adbhuta shringa Darina miranya kashipu tanu bringa Keshavadisha narahari rupa Jai Jagadisha Hare Jai Jagadisha Hare Jai Jagadisha Hare Avakara Kamalavare Naka Adbhuta Shringa Darina Miranya Kashipu Anubringa Tejavadisha Narahari Rupa Jai Jagadisha Hare Jai Jagadisha Hare Jai Jagadisha Hare Keshavadita Narahari Rupa Jai Jagadisha Hare Jai Jagadisha Hare Jai Jagadisha Hare Keshavadita Jaya Narasimhadev, 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 Jaya Narasimhadev. Jaya Prahlad Maharaj, Prahlad Maharaj, Prahlad Maharaj, Jaya Prahlad Maharaj. Jaya Jaya Prabhupada, Prabhupada, Jaya Upad, Jaya Jaya Prabhupada. Jai Narasimhadev Bhagavan ki Jai. We all have prasad now, which is being served outside. Thank you very much for participating. Thank you.